This is episode 2 of the Populist Brief video news with Shane Trejo. Today I'm talking about the state of the liberty movement in 2018. So, give a little pretext. I come from the liberty movement. I've got my start in 2006 as a member of the Libertarian Party. You know, that party has, back in those days, the sort of the headmaster of the party was Mike Badnarik, who was a constitutionalist and much less fringe. He was kind of more Tea Party-ish than the Libertarian Party members of nowadays. So he was a good guy to get, some constitutionally minded people in through the door of the Libertarian Party. And I was one of them, young, 17, 18 years old, looking to, saw the status quo was going, down the crapper, hated the Republicans and the Democrats. So naturally I gravitated to a third party. So after seeing years of that, not really taking off, and seeing that the constitutional voices were shockingly gaining traction in the Republican Party, I switched over and became a nullification states' rights activist, still very much a Ron Paul supporter throughout that era, and then did things on the more Republican side of things, although I still pushed legislative initiatives that many libertarians can get behind. So I moved over more to the right-wing sphere throughout the years, and Campaign for Liberty was, one of the organizations working on the right wing for a libertarian cause. And they pushed a lot of great things in their heyday, including non-interventionist foreign policy, sound money, auditing the Federal Reserve, private property rights. They were against globalism in many ways, against the United Nations, against the IMF, basically against the the same sort of apparatus that Trump's against, although Trump, doesn't have the specifics down as much as, I would like him to, but he does take it to the globalists in a way that no one ever has before, and he deserves credit on that front. But Campaign for Liberty was doing well. Ron Paul's presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2012 did spectacularly well, not well enough to win a primary, but well enough to get millions of votes, bring out millions of people, create a cause that resonated nationally, got people elected at the state level, the local level, and even at the national level in many cases. Still people there to this very day from that, from the era of Ron Paul, who Ron Paul blazed the trail to get them in there. And we're much better off for having them, people like Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, Ron Paul's son, Justin Amash, and others. These people have voted constitutionally for the most part, and have led the way in Congress, and the Freedom Caucuses. A lot of those guys were also brought in because of Ron Paul or the Tea Party movement. So we really did change the DNA of the Republican Party. We sort of laid down the seeds that led to the populist uprising of Donald Trump. But somewhere along the line, things went haywire, and I think they started to go haywire when Rand Paul started to he began to run for president. Even years before, he changed his message. Early Rand Paul, when Rand and Ron were a 1-2 punch in the House and Senate, Rand was incredible. He was really incredible up until he did that drone filibuster, which was also incredible. I loved it. It was perfect. It resonated, made the mark, dominated news cycles for days, sent public opinion regarding drones from, tons of support for drones to tons of skepticism from it, according to every opinion poll. That's when we peaked, and I was hoping at that point that the drone filibuster would be the thing that would take the movement to the next level, so that we could finally level the establishment and get a libertarianized Republican Party going. But it didn't quite work out that way. Not due in full part to Rand messing up on the campaign trail. The establishment came out with a lot of different propaganda in that era too. ISIS, magically showed up. As soon as people stopped being scared by Al Qaeda, well, look what comes out of central casting. But ISIS, they're like Al Qaeda, only scarier. So that sent a lot of the GOP people who were skeptical of the wars, and turned them back into pro-war people like they were right after 9/11. So the scare tactics were in full effect. Another thing that happened was the Black Lives Matter movement polarized the police violence situation. So now You have gangs, mobs of people who hit the streets and burn down cities. What does that do? That rallies people to the cops. So these gangs of roving communists racializing the police violence issue really made that into a wedge issue that hurt the liberty movement. So those two things aside, those two things really put a wrench in the gears of the Paul campaign before it even started. But Rand Paul did not do himself any favors. What he spent most of his time doing was, instead of making sure he had his base sewn up, his Tea Party base, and making sure that the Ron Paul people were involved, he instead focused a lot of his energies on racial minority outreach. Now, I haven't seen any evidence, and I've asked many people high in the liberty movement of, has this approach grown the movement at all? Most of the people that have been brought into the movement because of this don't really have libertarian ideals. They have social justice ideals. But since they can get a paycheck, an easy paycheck in the liberty movement, that they've kind of moved over this way from the left. So it didn't help. He gave a speech at Howard University talking about criminal justice reform, and he talked about wanting to put more felons in the voting booth, even though it wouldn't help the Republicans win. And Republicans were pissed off at this stuff. And as a grassroots Republican activist of several years at that point, I was hearing from people, and I couldn't defend Rand because I had the exact same problems with him. So he comes out, he thinks that I got these Tea Partiers and these Liberty people in my back pocket. Well, not quite. He's immediately upstaged by Donald Trump. Then Ted Cruz, starts acting like Donald Trump too. So it's really those two guys who get all of the anti-establishment support. Other candidate Ben Carson also received a lot of the support that Rand would have gotten if he'd have stayed strong. So Rand was left with 2% of the vote. He got roughly 1/5 of the support of Ron Paul in 2012. He didn't even come close to doing what Ron did in his first 2008 campaign. In terms of moving the Overton window or moving the political sphere in the direction of liberty. He moved it away from the direction of liberty, and made a lot of bad mistakes along the way. And Gary Johnson then came in to co-opt the Ron Paul revolution. He tried to co-opt it in 2012 too by running against Ron Paul in the GOP field before he was bounced. He gained no traction, so he ran with his tail between his legs to the Bush Leagues, the Libertarian Party, who were happy to have him. They're happy to parade around any sort of establishment and Republican leftovers that they can get, because that's all they can do. They don't have any they don't have many authentic candidates themselves. Maybe there's a few in the party who would be decent, but usually they can't win, unfortunately. So then Gary Johnson comes around, and he's paraded around with a media blitz that no libertarian's ever seen, and he's just a clown. He has Bill Weld as his vice president. Bill Weld is an Iraq war supporting, Patriot Act supporting, big government Republican, longtime friend of Hillary. I've written articles that just go through his greatest hits of just how he's awful on everything, and he even as governor he exploded the deficits and debts. Just a total fraud. But Gary Johnson brought him on, said he was his co-president. They go on a national media tour that I still think it's very possible that they were just set up, or at least Weld was set up to make libertarians look bad on this comedy of errors on the campaign trail. And you see libertarians who went from being we're uber principled. We have Ron Paul as our standard bearer, a guy with all the credibility. Ron Paul, a real life Mr. Smith goes to Washington type figure. This is our standard bearer, and this is our hero. And we were assaulted by people verbally because of this, because they were mad. But we had credibility, we had good ideas, we had a new vision. That was all pissed away, and it was pissed away, in my opinion, mainly because of Rand Paul and Gary Johnson. Rand Paul could have just said, he could have went out there day one and said straight up, I'm here to finish the job my father started. The Ron Paul revolution is not over. We're taking it to the next level. He never did that. He basically acted like his father didn't exist until like a week before the Iowa caucus, and he needed to trot him out out of desperation. And Rand sort of let Campaign for Liberty languish too, while he was, going out and rubbing elbows with the Chamber of Commerce and making deals with Mitch McConnell and endorsing Mitt Romney and doing all those other things that demoralized libertarians and sent them away from the movement. Then Gary Johnson came in and basically took, the damage that had been caused by Rand's missteps and just nuked it to where there's nothing left. So right now we're in this nothing left stage of the liberty movement. And it's getting really ugly. Right now, there's a story I did last week. It was about a Virginia Senate race. Now, it's very important, this race, in my opinion, because of what's going on in the grassroots. Both these guys are probably going to lose to incumbent Virginia Senator Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine is a scumbag in our eyes. He's, establishment as it gets. He's probably been to a few Pizzagate parties in his day. But this guy, he's entrenched, he's an incumbent, and Virginia, the demographics there, Virginia's basically it's becoming the California of the East, unfortunately. But we have a candidate in the Republican primary named Cory Stewart. He's very much pro-Trump. He's America First kind of guy. And what's most important is that he hammers people. He will hammer Tim Kaine, and he will hammer the establishment with fearlessness, and that's what we need right now. We need We need to take it to the next level against these people. We need to push forward, not backward. We need to hammer the Tim Kaines of the world. We need to make this as ugly as possible because who knows? Tim Kaine might fall apart under the pressure, like Eric Cantor did, also in Virginia. So crazy things can happen in politics, but only if you have the right guy with the right message, with the backbone to do it. Cory Stewart's going up against Nick Freitas. He's a Virginia state delegate, state representative, looking to make the jump from state rep all the way to national senator. That doesn't happen very often. Freitas seems like an all right candidate. He's good on the Second Amendment, solid on most liberty issues. But the problem is he's running a campaign that's straight out of 2012 or 2014. Very bland, constitutional Tea Party type candidate. Now, granted, that those ideas were hot from approximately 2008 to 2014, 2015. But even then, people who pushed those points of view, people who talked about the Constitution and liberty, had a very, very low rate of being elected during that period of when we had all the momentum behind us. Because we had the momentum, we didn't have the money. And that's what it comes down to, is money and resources. And unfortunately, all of those campaigns fell to waste, with only a handful of exceptions. So Freitas is, in order to try to give himself some support in this race, he's allied with the establishment. He's got the corrupt establishment governor, Bob McDonnell, funneling establishment money into his coffers. He's resurrected the Ron Paul Inc. crew, who siphoned a lot of money from the Paul campaigns in 2008, 2012 with not a whole lot to show for it. He's doing business with these types of people. He's got the Koch brothers front group, Americans for Prosperity, behind him, supporting him because of his open borders policy, I presume. So he's got the establishment money behind him, and that's bad enough. I think that's very shameful. I really dislike the developing alliance that's seemingly happening between the establishment and the liberty movement. I think the idea of everyone, the establishment's so reviled, they're under so much heat, more people hate them than ever, and libertarians are crawling to them for scraps? To me, that just seems completely wrong and betrays the spirit of everything that the Ron Paul Revolution stood for. So that's bad enough. But then a recent email blast from the Freitas campaign accusing Cory Stewart of being a racist, to me that was over the line. That's sickening. And all based on innuendo, based on hit pieces, based on bad journalism, tenuous connections. Said that, and also bald-faced lies. I posted in my article the links to Cory Stewart denouncing white supremacists and racists. And in the Freitas email, he claimed that Cory Stewart never did such a thing. He claimed that he was connected to Jason Kessler, who helped do lead the Unite to Right rally in Charlottesville that was such a disaster last year. Even though he denounced the Charlottesville neo-Nazis and the Charlottesville white supremacists, Stewart did. So there's just a lot of lies. Cory Stewart had also defended Paul Nehlen back when he was a Trump favorite before he went off the rails. At the same time, President Trump, Breitbart News, Sarah Palin, Phyllis Schlafly, and other, Tom Tancredo, and other relatively maybe far right, but nevertheless mainstream figures were coming out for Nehlen. And then once he went off the rails and started doxing people and posting crazy stuff, people started backing away. So it's just a very desperate hit piece, and really what I think the Freedist campaign is trying to do, because they don't have the grassroots behind them. They had to go to the establishment to find support. So what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to signal to the liberals to show up on primary day so they can take out a Trump populist and then put in a libertarian meat shield to protect the establishment. So that's the state of the liberty movement. I could rant. I've been ranting and raving almost 20 minutes now, so I could go on. I will go on in the future on issues similar to this, but just wanted to lay some context and tell you what's going on now with all that's happening. It's a lot going on. It's easy to get confused, easy to lose sight of everything that's happening. But I've been in the liberty movement for 12 years now, and I've got a pretty good foundation of knowledge of the history of the liberty movement and why it acts the way it does right now. So a final thought for libertarians who may be watching this, who are becoming disaffected, thinking of quitting: don't quit. I would say, join the Republican Party. Show the right-wing nationalists that you're one of them. Don't go in there being arrogant or haughty or conceited. Go in there, try to find areas of agreement with the most of the Trump people. Believe in America first. They hate the United Nations. They hate the globalist power structure, and they need people to help them defeat it. They need people to tell them exactly what it consists of and how we have to stop it. So that's the role that libertarians can fill these days. There is no Ron Paul revolution. Libertarianism is no longer driving the national conversation in any way, shape, or form, but we can still find our way forward. And if you don't want to do the GOP thing, I know there are authentic groups out there too. Not really my cup of tea, but they push Bitcoin, and they're more about getting back to the land. So if you want to do that, more power to you. But I think that joining the right wing and helping the Trump revolution forward, as Trump goes on his Twitter and bashes the FBI, bashes the deep state. He's putting a lot of attention on the bad actors who Ron Paul also put attention on back in the day when Ron said disband the FBI, disband the CIA, disband the NSA. Trump is tapping into that, and it seems like he's trying to deliver, at least when it comes to stopping the FBI or the corrupt interests of the FBI. So let's help with that, and let's not go and sell our souls to the establishment. Thank you for listening.